Welcome this afternoon to her church. As you know, this is a sacred space. Oops, I just spit out your wall. This is a sacred space, mostly or fully, because the Divine One, she chooses to be present when you gather. So our presence in our gathering today not only invokes her and calls her, but she gathers with us. So what a blessing it is to know that and experience that. And we gave you somewhat comfy seats on top of it all. So her church welcomes today's program, but also welcomes you. And if you don't have a place, you know, they pay me to say this, so I have to say it now. If you don't have a place you call your spiritual home, or if you like the most of our congregation, if you already have one or two, this could be your third place. It's okay. So please do, if you have not had the opportunity to take advantage of some of her church's programs, the arts, the Liturgy of the Divine Feminine, our naked dance on once a month, and all those good things. So just check that out on the website. So thank you for being here. And it is our honor with, what's the name of your group again?
Analytical Chapter.
Oh, the Analytical Psychology Club has sponsored this event. And in fact, they're responsible for the whole thing except for the chairs and the building. But because of that, we say, yay, we piggyback with you. We are partners because we are all partners in this great journey of life. And it's important for us to be a part of that, given the climate of our nation and world right now, to recognize the partnerships that we have that are strong and good and just. And so today, I'm not introducing you, that's someone else's job. So today, I would like to introduce Jana, who's going to help us continue to make those beautiful connections, one with another and with the great Mary Magdalene of all time, and probably you too.
So my name is Jana Hutchison, and I'm a member of her church, and I'm a member of the Analytical Psychology Club, and we're co-sponsoring this with Kayleen today. And I have been to Humanities West, and I have heard Kayleen speak about Salvador Dali and Eric Satie. I have been to the Commonwealth Club, and I've heard her speak about Pythagoras. And I have been to Petaluma, and I've heard her speak about Greek mythology. And I've heard that she went to Paris with Lauren Artis recently. She's on the internet with Mary Magdalene. And wherever she is or wherever she goes, I recommend it. She's, whatever it is, it's very interesting and it's very charming. And she also has a lot of interesting things on the table back there, which I recommend. And let's see, what else did I want to say? Oh yeah, Kayleen is a faculty member of the Pacifica Graduate Institute in Santa Barbara. She teaches regularly at the Osher Lifelong Learning at UC Berkeley, Sonoma State, and Dominican University. She has also been known to teach at the Conservatory of Music here in San Francisco. She is a cultural historian and musician. So with that, I'm going to introduce Kayleen to speak about Mary Magdalene today. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, and thank you for coming on such a gorgeous day. I know it must have been very tempting to head out to the beach or the hiking trails, but my hope is that today we're going to be basking in an inner light. An inner light that has been passed down through the centuries in very, very diverse ways. I like to say that Mary Magdalene is one of those figures who is all around us, but we seldom know it. And I didn't know that we were going to have such an amazing piano, otherwise I would have brought music, but just as a way of showing how she is hidden throughout the centuries, let me just do this. This piece of music is by Johann Sebastian Bach, Fantasy in A minor. This piece is by Ludwig van Beethoven, a century later, generation later. What do the two of them share in common besides being two of the most amazing composers who've ever walked the earth? Well, in their lives, the celebration of the feast day of Mary Magdalene was of the highest importance. And in that regard, Bach's second wife, some of you may have actually played this particular piece of music and know it quite well. The Minuet in G from a collection known as the Notebook for Anna Magdalena Bach. Bach's second wife was named after Mary Magdalene. Beethoven, in his letters to friends, said that the happiest days of his life were the days in which they celebrated his mother's Saint's Day. His mother's name was Maria Magdalena. Rodin's sister was named Mary Magdalene. On and on and on we go, peeking out through history, this little figure as if she's saying, peekaboo, peekaboo, peekaboo. Someone who has been a beacon of light and inspiration for figures ranging from St. Francis of Assisi and Catherine of Siena to the painter Artemisian Gentileschi. Today, we hope to celebrate this extraordinary legacy, and I think many of us would agree that it is a time that often feels like it is a time of growing darkness. Would you agree? Yes. Would you agree that this is a time that it feels as if the world is being torn asunder and polarized with different factions? It is a time in which grief and sorrow weigh heavy upon us, and fear and devastation are everywhere. And yet, it is also a time that beckons us to go inward and more deeply to build bridges. Now, as someone steeped in the depth psychology tradition, I, like all of the unions amongst you, am fascinated by two things. One is synchronicity, and another is the quest for wholeness. The quest for wholeness. And one of the reasons that I chose Mary Magdalene as my topic for my Ph.D. dissertation was because I believed that when I looked at her full range, both in text and perhaps more importantly, in image throughout the centuries, what emerged was an extraordinary composite figure of someone who held within them all of the paradoxes of what it is to be human, and did so in such a way that finally and ultimately represents the balm of healing and wholeness, forgiveness, and mercy. And one of the things that I hold so deeply about Mary Magdalene is, for me, she represents something that William Blake talked about, that great poet and artist said, to be spiritually mature requires being able to hold both hands full. One hand able to hold the grief and the sorrow of the world, but the other to hold in the other hand gratitude and joy. And I think what Mary Magdalene does and has done throughout the centuries is to stand as a beacon who illuminates in an archetypal way what it might be to do just that. How can we stand with our eyes open and witness the grief and the sorrow and the suffering around us? But how can we also turn to open our hearts to new life and joy and possibilities, even when they appear not the way we expected? So I'm just going to invite us into that. And before we go into the history, the mythology, the symbolism, and traditions around Mary Magdalene, I'd like to actually begin by learning what's in the room with us today. I have been doing Mary Magdalene workshops since before the Da Vinci Code. And it's been a fascinating journey to watch the evolution of her image and to see in places ranging from Baton Rouge to France to England to Wales to the San Francisco Bay Area, how she is seen and received and who she is for you. That question that Jesus asks his disciples, who do you say I am? I think is ultimately the most important thing that you might come out of today with, is a deeper, fuller, broader answer to that question. Who is Mary Magdalene for you? And I want to say that I welcome all answers, all answers. As a mythologist in the death psychology tradition, I love what Joseph Campbell said. He was reputed to have said at one point, he was asked if something was true. He says, is it true? Is it true? And he said, of course it's true. And some of it might have even happened. So I'm going to invite us into that space today, that space of what is true for you. And I can tell you, I've spent more than 15 years of my life combing through hundreds of books, going on pilgrim trails, traveling the world, so that I can sift and tell you, well, this is legend, this is history, this probably didn't actually happen, but this one has resonated in the hearts of centuries of people. But today, can we agree that we will just step into that space where we let all of the images speak, even the ones that may not be historically accurate? Because the most important thing about Mary Magdalene is going to be how she shines a light on each of our hearts, our longings, our fears, our hopes. So I would love if we could, to begin today, if you don't mind, I'm going to take one of her symbols. This will become more transparent later, but the symbol of the red egg is one of her symbols. And I'm going to invite us, if we can, just to pass the red egg. And I would like you to just say one word. I know it might be hard, but don't even give us a prelude. Just say one word of who Mary Magdalene is for you.
Feminine.
Feminine. Role model.
Fully
No, this is good. This is good.
nurturing.
Nurturing. Hope.
Unity.
Unity.
Love.
Love. Wisdom.
Strength.
Strength. Spiritual alchemist.
A muse.
Muse.
Yes.
Devotional. Mother.
Mentor.
Mentor.
Radiant.
Radiant.
Saint.
Saint.
Jesus' best friend.
Jesus' best friend.
The wise old
The wise,
woman's
the wise old woman spirit.
Guide.
Guide.
Female phoenix of the ashes.
Female phoenix from the ashes.
brave.
Brave.
Companion.
Companion.
Role model.
Role model.
Light.
Light.
Heart space.
Heart space.
Mystery.
Mystery.
Compassion.
Compassion.
Myself.
Myself.
Male, female.
Male, female.
Chalice.
Chalice.
Beauty.
Beauty.
Balancer.
Balancer.
Misunderstood.
Misunderstood.
Potent.
Potent.
Myriad. Myriad.
Myriad.
Partner.
Partner.
Teacher.
Teacher.
Beauty.
Beauty.
Divine.
Divine.
Consort.
Consort.
Inspiration.
Inspiration.
Beacon.
Beacon.
Sister.
Sister.
Unconditional love.
Unconditional love. Back here. You too, cameraman.
Maligned.
Maligned.
Lover.
Lover. And in the far back, what would be your word?
Holy.
Holy? Holy. Oh, I love this because when I first did this workshop, you know, what a change, because the first 2 years I did this workshop, the words were sinner, adulteress, and prostitute. So I want us to just notice there was a rich diversity of images here. And maybe you noticed within yourself some of them you resonated with, and others you thought, that's not who she is for me. But notice what a rich array there was. And they were so positive, right? So positive. So we are living in a time of reclamation. And I actually want to go back to this image that I began with, because this is a wonderful symbol. This is a statue of Mary Magdalene that's in a tiny little town in the Dordogne region that's named after her. It's called La Madeleine. It's a UNESCO heritage site because this is where the cradle of artistic civilization is. It's close to Lascaux caves, where the cave paintings are. And when they were researching at this site, when they were doing this finding, they found all of this incredible artwork and these statues and these beads and jewelry and all of this crown of civilization, of Palestinian civilization. It was underneath the caves of Mary Magdalene, and it's called, then after her, La Madeleine. And when I first went there, this statue was over in the corner, on the bottom of the floor, covered with dirt in this derelict place. And the next time I went there, I brought flowers and candles, and she had been lifted up. She was still on the side, but she was put on a table in the corner, and it was still filled with cobwebs and dirt. And then the fourth time I went there, she had moved from being on the floor and in the corner and then on the table, and now she was brought into the light. And then the last time I went there last year, there were fresh flowers everywhere, and there was a whole series of candles in front of her. Isn't that a hopeful image? It's a hopeful image, and I think that's what we are seeing right now. And I would hold fast to that image as an image not only of her being lifted up from the shadows and brought forward, but how it changes the world around us to do that. The whole chapel was a different place when she was in her proper place. Oh, I got goosebumps just saying that. I'm going to say that again. The whole chapel was a different place when she was in her proper place. And I noticed how many of you said the word beauty. Beauty. So this is who she is for you right now. And just notice that and hold fast to that in your own heart. And I would say that one of the things that I find so entrancing about Mary Magdalene is one of her symbols, which is a mirror. This is a painting by Georges de Latour, the French painter who painted several depictions of a contemplative Magdalene. All of them have a mirror and a candle. And I think that this is very suggestive, that throughout the centuries, she has been someone who has held the light, and who has also been a mirror for us, and a mirror for the world of that time. She really has been somebody who has held what probably we would call the shadow of the collective across the centuries. And we will be exploring that today. I have to confess, this is one of my most favorite images of Mary Magdalene, because I think it also conveys a deep psychological symbol. Do you see what she has on her lap? It's a skull. And if you notice, she's got a very round belly, right? A very, very round belly. So some people, I don't happen to agree with this, I'll be very transparent, but some people, like Margaret Starford, has suggested that she's pregnant here, that this is Mary Magdalene pregnant with Jesus' child. But I like to take it like a dream, like a good union would. And what might it mean to be both pregnant and to hold a skull on your lap? And I think that this really gets to a fundamental truth about Mary Magdalene, which is she is a big enough figure to hold both life and death. She holds both life and death within her image. And in so doing, she's able to gaze on the light and contemplate the light. And for us, oh, do we need that now? Now, I want to mention that it's always a challenge to do, my preference is to do a whole week of Mary Magdalene, a deeper version in Provence, where we go to the caves and walk in places and go on pilgrimage and go to site after site after site, absorb the information. My former pilgrims are nodding their head going, yes, yes, yes. And that's my first preference. And my second preference is to work with churches to do a long series where we can go week by week after different facets. Today we're going to have what I think of as a sampler plaque. So there's going to be little pieces of it. And my hope is it will whet your appetite to go deeper and further. And one of the resources to go deeper and further you have a card for, and that's a 22-day online program that will go deeper into these stories. So if you're feeling like, I want to know more about that, I had one student who said, curse you, Kayleen Asbo, curse you! You planted this seed inside of me. How will I ever do this now? But there are some resources to do that. So if you feel tantalized, know that there's more. So she holds a mirror throughout the centuries, and she shows a mirror to us of what the world has been and sometimes what the world has lost and what the world is aching for to come back in. And this is something that she has done over and over and over. So we're going to sample, just taste, the biblical Magdalene, so we're all on the same page, because there are certain things that I think it's important to start with that before we go anywhere else. Then we'll talk about some of her manifestations historically, how she has appeared in different cultures at different times, how different centuries have answered the question, who do you say I am? And we'll really dive into Toni Wolff's work, Toni Wolff, the great companion of Carl Jung, and she talked about 4 facets of the archetypes of the feminine. And we're going to sample them, how Mary Magdalene throughout the centuries has embodied all 4 of them at different points. I'll just tell you right now, those 4 are the mother, the mystic, the lover, and the warrior. So in a nutshell, we'll talk about how she's appeared in each of those guises. And then I want to talk about how she has been appearing in our time, in dreams and visions everywhere. Everywhere I go, everywhere I lecture, I have usually a half hour of people afterwards who are dying to tell me their dream about Mary Magdalene. And it really is a remarkable phenomenon. In some cases, whole communities have been drawn together from Russia and Uzbekistan and France and Brazil, all having a dream of converging together. Amazing, fascinating story. And then we'll end with images of pilgrimage, which is becoming more and more in our time of institutional disaffection. More and more pilgrimage and going to holy sites has become a conduit for really learning and experiencing, having a profound, deep, luminous experience. So this is what we will be surveying today. The other image I like to really start with when we are really beginning this work is this one. This is a fresco by Giotto. It is in the Basilica of St. Francis in Assisi. It is actually in the chapel where St. Francis's body was for many, many years while the rest of the basilica was being completed. And what I want us to notice in this particular image is that it conveys, despite some of the misinformation and the malignment that's happened throughout the centuries, we have something very important visually. Medieval painters did not paint according to accuracy of physical appearance. They painted according to spiritual stature. So I want you to notice how big Mary Magdalene is, and how small the cardinal is. And in fact, the cardinal, if I did this to somebody, what would you say it was a gesture of? A gesture of humility and oblation and reverence. And in fact, what he's doing, he almost looks like he's about ready to kiss her ring, if you look at it, which is the gesture that cardinals give to the Pope, or the gesture that lords give to their king. So we have an image here that's preserved for us in this basilica, this image of Mary Magdalene as a figure of towering spiritual authority, who is to be reverenced, one might even say worshipped, but reverenced and treated with enormous respect. And that's the image that I want to hold that has been a red thread throughout history. Despite all of the other things that have happened over and over and over again, we have this image of Mary Magdalene as a figure of towering spiritual authority. Notice again, can you see this? It might be a little hard from where you're seated, so I'm going to come up. Here's Mary Magdalene. Here's the Pope. And in fact, her gesture is almost as if she is giving him the power of being on the throne, right there. So we can see this, and I think this is one of the most important sources of information. And Carl Jung in the tradition of depth psychology would agree with this, that the visual is primary art carries information that mere history books will omit. So I'm going to hope that we all touch into the visual of this. The earliest Mary Magdalene, if we only look at the first 120 years of written text, what we find is the image of a faithful disciple who is a wisdom teacher. And this is true if we look at both, first a student of wisdom and then ultimately commissioned to be a teacher of wisdom. And this is true whether we look at the canonical texts in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, or whether we look at the non-canonical texts that were recovered in the 20th century that have been hidden in the caves of Egypt for centuries upon centuries upon centuries. And yet, so often we don't know what's in front of our face. This painting right here is in a church in Rome. It's in one of my favorite churches. It's the only Gothic church. It's just a couple of blocks away from the Pantheon. It's in a church called Santa Maria sopra Minerva, which means Saint Mary on top of Minerva, goddess of wisdom, who was the Roman version of Athena. And then outside you would find an obelisk of Isis, because the real name of the church should be Santa Maria sopra Minerva, sopra Athena, sopra Isis, this place of the feminine throughout the centuries. And there's one whole chapel that has the pagan symbols of the ancient world on the ceiling. That's a whole other topic that's fascinating. And these days, and then you come to the other side chapel, behind a grate is this painting. And it says St. Barnabas with another saint. So she's not even named here. And in order to get this picture, this is my kind of detective work, I had to have my iPhone ready, and I had to go to the next door civil chapel and put in some coins so that the light would come on, and then run over to the gate with my iPhone and stick it through the gate and take a picture and then blow it up. And what it is a woman who has all the hallmarks of what come to be her iconographic tradition. She's wearing red, she has green sleeves, she's holding an open book, she has long red hair, and she's pointing to a text, and the text says, in Latin, the Apostle of the Apostles. Now that was her first title. That was her oldest title. And thankfully, we've all lived long enough that Pope Francis has reclaimed that title. It was never lost in the Eastern Orthodox tradition. It's persisted throughout the centuries. But in the Latin West, she moved from being the Apostle of Apostles, which is a word, by the way, that can be translated, that phrase, as the teacher of teachers. So she was the teacher of teachers. But she's not even named in this church, and she's behind a grate, and she's in the dark. And we need to bring her back into the light. We need to bring her back into the light to put her back in her rightful place. I took this picture 15 years ago, and I still am afraid I'm going to get in trouble for this one. This one's from the Vatican. And I want you to look closely at it. You're going to see a painting. And those of you who've heard this lecture before, you're not allowed to talk, okay? Promise. So here we have a standard depiction of the Virgin Mary with baby Jesus on a throne. And then there are different saints that are there. Does anybody notice anything strange about this painting?
She's wearing red. She's wearing red. Yeah.
Oh. Thank you. It never fails. Most of the audience usually doesn't see that something has been left out of the picture until it's pointed out. And this is a great example of a cultural phenomenon that we have all around us. And we are living in a time of putting back these missing pieces, and the largest one is Mary Magdalene, but I would say there are other women that have been cut out of the picture. And this woman here in the front row, Bonnie Ring, has written a book about other women. And I want to talk to her at break because she has highlighted some of what is missing in the picture. So this is a phenomenon that happened over centuries. Here's an image from Europus of St. Paul, and at his side is the woman who he preached and taught with, a fellow disciple by the name of Thecla. But Thecla's eyes were gouged out, and her hand, which had the same gesture, the same hand mudra of teaching and blessing, got burned away. So we are in a time where we need to open our eyes. You know, Jesus is often saying, those who have eyes to see, see. Those who have ears to hear, hear. And we need to awaken to see these clues. Things that happen in Mary Magdalene is all four Gospels, all four of them agree, and this is very unusual. The priests in the room will confirm that it's very unusual for the Gospels to actually agree on details of just about anything. And all four Gospels agree that Mary Magdalene was present for the suffering. She was there at the foot of the cross. She was there when the male disciples had fled in fear and terror. She was there when Peter had denied Christ 3 times. So all four of them agree that she was present as a witness for suffering. So in this image that we have by Giotto, we see Mary Magdalene in her rightful place. She is at the foot of the cross there with her long red hair, kneeling in sorrow and in grief. What often happened is that over time, the picture got changed. Do you notice what's odd about this one? Well, now she's still there, but who else is in the picture? Well, there's a bunch of Franciscan monks. Well, the problem with that is that the Franciscan order wasn't founded until the 13th century, so what are they doing in the picture? Eventually, Mary Magdalene gets pushed to the side. Now she's no longer at the foot of the cross at all. Now the Franciscan monks are at the cross, and along with the wealthy people who are paying for the painting, they are now in the picture. And the third one, the last one I didn't even put here, Mary Magdalene, is not in the picture at all. It's more like that Vatican image that I showed you where something was completely cut out. She's not in the picture. But if we actually took the text and we cut Mary Magdalene out of the text of the Bible, we would have a problem. And that is because every scene in which she is in is the hinge on which Christianity hangs. That Mary Magdalene is the only person, including Jesus' mother, the only person that the gospel writers agree was present through death and suffering. And she is the only person that the gospel writers agree was present for the resurrection the next day. So I'm not going to go through this in great detail. I know we have a bunch of priests. If you want me to come and do a series and a day-long workshop, we could do a whole day just on biblical Magdalene. But if you're interested, there's a great little reference tool. And that is blueletterbible.com. You put in the name Magdalene, it will pop up with every single passage in which Mary Magdalene appears. And there are 12 of these, which on the one hand isn't a whole lot. On the other hand, it's more than just about any other character. And all of them agree that she was the faithful witness for the crucifixion, present there, present as the witness who comes to the tomb to anoint the body, present sometimes as the leader of women. With Mary Magdalene is usually the person who's named first, which is an honorific title. And sometimes she's the only one, as in the Gospel of John. She is the only witness for the resurrection, the very first witness, or as one priest said that I like to quote, the very first Christian. And we have then this idea that she is the faithful witness who then Jesus commissions, and he says to her in each of these accounts, go now and tell your brothers. Go now and carry this message. And this image right here then, we have the image from the Orthodox tradition of her doing just that. Mary Magdalene is arriving with the gesture in her hand of teaching and preaching. And there are the 11 remaining disciples who, from the book of Acts, are cowering in fear, terrified that they too will be arrested, tried, and convicted. And she has come to bring them the message. Those are the only references we get by the name Mary Magdalene. Witness, 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 with one exception in the Gospel of Luke, where there's a reference to her having been healed of 7 afflictions. But then there's another Mary, and from the very beginning centuries of Christianity, there has been a debate whether this Mary is also Mary Magdalene. She is known in the text as Mary of Bethany. And you will get across the centuries people arguing whether they're the same or the different. She is the sister of Martha, and she is the sister of Lazarus. And in this biblical text, Jesus is affirming her right to be a disciple. Martha comes out and says, don't you care that my sister is just sitting here while I'm running around trying to make all of the provisions for the men? Can't you make her help me? And Jesus, bless his heart, for one of the first feminists after Pythagoras, says, Martha, 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 you are worried about so many things. But Mary has chosen the better part. So he affirms her right, even though it was most unusual in Jewish culture. He affirms her right to be present. Then we have the image of Lazarus being resuscitated from the dead. Mary's weeping, and in response, Jesus also weeps. And then finally we have an anointing scene. And this woman appears as an unnamed woman in the other biblical texts, but in the Gospel of John, the woman who anoints Jesus with ointment and wipes his feet with her hair, who prepares him for his death, is named Mary, the one who was from Bethany, whose brother Lazarus was sick. So, if this was all that we had, it would be enough to create a very vivid and consistent portrait of a woman. And I'd like to hear a few words from you. Put yourself in this position. What does it take? What does it take for a human being, first of all, to stand and watch another person that they love, their teacher, be tortured to death, and to never flinch? We're told that she stood there until his body was taken down. To stay there present for every breath. What does it take of a human being to do that? Give me a couple words. Determination, strength, courage, perseverance, love, understanding, compassion, fortitude, wisdom, strength. So if we extrapolate from what the gospel writers have given us, wow, what a person that is. What qualities does it take to go the next day? Have any of you prepared the body of someone who has died? Have any of you anointed the dead body with ointment and oil and wrapped it for burial? What does that take? Devotion. Deep love. Devotion. What does it take to be the person that the leader of a religious movement will go to and say, I trust you. You are the one that I want to carry my message back to everyone else. What quality does that take? That's an awful lot of faith, isn't it, to be placed on the shoulders of one person? Doesn't that connote that Jesus had incredible respect for her? And that he believed her to be the most faithful and reliable bearer of his message? Think about that. If you had one person that you were going to go to communicate, who would you pick? You would pick somebody that you thought was wise and trustworthy and true. So if all that we had from the Bible, this almost makes me want to cry. If actually people had actually read that text, who would Mary Magdalene be? Who would she be?
The head of the church.
Who would she be? She would be this. She would be this. She would be the figure of towering spiritual authority who deserves our respect and our reverence, who would be a leader of the church. And that is who she was for many people throughout the centuries. I want to pause here because this could be enough, actually, to, there's a wonderful line in the Gospel of Thomas, seek until you find. When you find, you will be disturbed. So I'd like to just take one brief moment before we go to the next piece. And I'd like you to turn to somebody nearby, if you would. Introduce yourself, say your name. And I'd like you to notice and respond to these two questions. First of all, what has surprised you from what you've heard so far? And secondly, just name a couple of things that are missing from the Bible. This is who Mary Magdalene is quoting from the Bible. What don't we have in this story? What don't we have? So let's just take 2 minutes to do that. So let me hear 3 answers to who is she not according to the Bible. She is not a prostitute. We do not have anything about her being a prostitute. Any other words that you want to She's not the adulterous sinner. So just very quickly, I'm going to go through a couple things. There is a woman who was taken in adultery in the Bible. This woman was conflated for hundreds and hundreds of years. She has no name in the Bible. There is also this woman who is weeping and wiping her hair on Christ's feet when he comes to meet Simon the Pharisee. And one of the companions says, "Don't you know who's touching her? Touching you, she's a sinful woman." And Jesus comes to her defense, but that woman is also not named Mary Magdalene. And so these things were swirling around and they began to get confused. And they got confused right around the 4th century. A lot of confusion starts to emerge strangely right at the same time that St. Augustine is postulating his doctrine of original sin and the idea of the expulsion from Eden. And I would say that a lot of the feminine becomes demonized at that point. And this phrase that is much softer in the original language gets translated Noli tangere in Latin. Some of you have heard this note as well. It's seen in the Gospel of John where Jesus says to Mary, who reaches out to touch him, he says, "Do not cling to me. Do not cling to me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father." Well, translations are funny things, and when that gets translated to, "Do not touch me." And so this way, this image, Jesus is like, "Oh, you've got cookies." And for centuries, it's been the great tragedy that women were thought in the aftermath of Augustine to be unworthy of touching anything on the altar. To not touch anything, to not touch the sacraments, that as if we were all polluted with Eve's original sin. And boy, you read too much of that stuff and you're going to despair of humanity. My friend Sara Taft created this image called the 1400-year reputation. This is an homage to Pope Gregory over in the corner there. We could have a vigorous debate about Pope Gregory right now because he was one of those complicated people who has lots of wonderful things about him and lots of terrible things about him all mixed in one. But he gave this very influential sermon on Easter. And in that sermon, he established his doctrine. He said, "We believe that Mary of Bethany and Mary Magdalene and Luke's penitent, unnamed sinner are the same." And this sermon was copied down and it was disseminated all over Christendom. And from that moment forward, Mary Magdalene was known as the penitent sinner. She was the penitent sinner. Now, complicating that even further by the 6th century is there actually had been another Mary who was a penitent prostitute. And she's a fascinating character. Operas have been written about her. Her name is Mary of Egypt. And boy, if you want a racy hagiography, go read about Mary of Egypt. It is, it's definitely an R-rated saint story. And she was a wanton, lascivious woman who loved the pleasures of her flesh, and she sold her body on ships to go sailing and encountered the true cross and had a conversion experience, wandered into the desert, and then lived the rest of her life as a penitent. So you see here are some images of Mary of Egypt, the penitent sinner, Mary of Egypt, penitent sinner. There she is again, long. She's lived for 30 years in the wilderness, and she was naked, but her hair grew so long it covered her. Well, this all got confused with some of the French stories about Mary Magdalene that were part of the tradition there, where she had lived for 30 years as a contemplative hermit in the caves of Baume. And we get some of the same iconography then of priests coming and giving cloaks. And the two of them got so confused. They got so confused that by the 15th century, this is from an altarpiece, one of these women is named Mary of Egypt, and one of them is named Mary Magdalene. Who's who? It's like, spot the difference, right? They look, it's the same woman, long hair, in contemplation, in prayer. The woman on the left is Mary Magdalene because it is her jar of nard, of ointment that she was going to anoint Christ with. But you see how even visually they got confused as to who's who? And so it's like all of these women, there were so many Marys, they all got lumped together, and it turned into something totally different. So that Mary of Bethany, Mary of Egypt, Luke's unnamed sinner, then the adulteress, then on and on and on get confused and mixed up. And that's the image that persisted, and some circles still persists in Western Christianity to this day. And we are in the very complicated period right now of restoring her rightful image. So some of that can be traced back to Pope Gregory and his homily in 591. Some of that confusion goes back to St. Augustine himself. And we have this long, long line of artistic depictions, some of them terribly moving, deeply powerful, of the penitent prostitute. And so we go from the tenderness of the Gospel of John, do not cling to me, to do not touch me. And this has had tragic implications for Christianity. Now in Eastern Orthodox tradition, her title of apostle to apostles has been far more preserved. So in the Eastern Orthodox tradition, one of the legends of Mary Magdalene is after the events of the crucifixion. She went to tell of this to the Emperor Tiberius. He was at a banquet eating eggs. And he said that could no more happen, that story of death and resurrection, than this egg turned red. And accordingly, according to the legend, that's exactly what happened. And here's where we get the tradition in the East, thank you, of Easter eggs that are dyed red for Easter, the Sankey eggs. So in the Eastern Orthodox tradition, you will more often not see the penitent prostitute. You will see images like this image painted by Franciscan Robert Lentz that hangs at Grace Cathedral in honor of Mary Magdalene. Here we see a traditional icon, so she's garbed in red with the red egg. Notice that this woman is a woman who is respectable and respected, right? That she has a rather regal bear to her. In the West, we tend to say that women in red have other connotations. Scarlett O'Hara, when Rhett Butler wants to hold her up for being an adulteress, says, "You're going to dress like what you are, go get on your red dress." And we have that phrase of a woman in red, right? In the Eastern Orthodox tradition, red is a color of spiritual authority. A red dress in the West is associated with a prostitute. I like to have my favorite little joke, though, is if you call a woman in a red dress a prostitute, what do you call a man in a red dress? Think about it. And in fact, if we look at this whole tradition of red robes, whether in the Eastern or Western traditions, the Nyingma tradition in Buddhism, we find then that there are echoes of spiritual authority. So I'll say to you, those who have eyes to see that this is the color that she has been depicted of. And when you put the juxtaposition side by side, it carries a pretty powerful little message right there. Again, reinforcing the idea of Magdalene as spiritual authority. break while we readjust this. So let's begin in about 5 minutes.
Cut out of the picture.
A lot was cut out of the picture. And just very, very quickly, in case this isn't known information, what we have when we turn to the Bible, which I think we've established is already a consistent, reliable picture of someone who is courageous, compassionate, dedicated, and respected. In addition to that, there are other stories about Mary Magdalene that go back to the first century and a half of Christianity. And originally, there were literally hundreds of gospel stories. There were hundreds of stories about what Jesus did, what he taught, what he preached, what his message was. And the communities were vastly different from one another. Every local community had a very, very different perspective on this rabbi. In fact, there's a wonderful phrase by the scholar Elaine Pagels. She calls it a riot of pluralism in the first few centuries. That the definition of what it was to be a Christian was radically different. Some Christians believed that you had to convert first to Judaism and be circumcised before you could become a Christian. On the other hand, we had groups like the Carpo-Christians in Alexandria, who had one altar to Pythagoras, one to Plato, one to Aristotle, one to Jesus, and who continued to celebrate the Eleusinian mysteries dedicated to Demeter and Persephone. So just hold that for a moment about how wide and diverse Christianity was. Beginning in the 4th century, when the Emperor Constantine converted to Christianity, there was this vast movement to narrow the diversity and to establish what was correct theology. And the whole sense of what it was to be a Christian went from being wildly diverse to more and more and more controlled. So you then had to sign on and agree, like, this is the creed that I believe. We get the creeds from this period. And the other thing that happens is that the texts, which had proliferated for the first few centuries, where there were all kinds of gospels, got narrowed down, and a series of councils eventually decided that only 4 of them should bear the imprint of authorized texts. The others were systematically destroyed in many cases, and in other cases they just stopped being copied out. But in 1945, many of these lost texts were recovered. They were recovered 3 kilometers away from a monastery which had an enormous library at the time. And they were found in these caves. These are known as the Nag Hammadi Library. You can find them online. And read Elaine Pagels' excellent, groundbreaking book, The Gnostic Gospels, if you're interested in this. And in these texts, we have another recovered image of Mary Magdalene. There are a number of these stories in which Mary Magdalene appears in the same light. And many of the gospel stories that is a vast and fascinating collection actually, I would say, support the role that she has in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. I don't think there's anything contradictory between the recovered texts and the long-established texts. In each of these, Gospel of Thomas, Dialogue of the Savior, Gospel of Philip, Pistis Sophia, Manichaean Psalms, and then, not in this collection but found separately, the Gospel of Mary. And each and every one of them, she is a faithful student and disciple who shows wisdom and courage, and that Jesus points to and says things like, "Oh, Mary, you in whom wisdom has been perfected, more than all your brothers." And she's given these titles like the woman who knew all. So it's a very consistent portrayal, actually, with what we have in the canonical texts, even though they were lost and in some cases destroyed. Now there's one word that's used to describe Mary in some of these texts, and it's a word that conveys this alchemical image of wholeness and integration. And I will say, by the way, for those of you, because I know many of you are Jungian fans, that Carl Jung was fascinated by the early Christian movement in the deserts of Egypt around where this monastery lived. And he was particularly interested in what he saw as this pursuit of internal wisdom that was represented by Egyptian Christians of the first few centuries. He actually called the so-called Gnostics the world's first depth psychologists. And there's a fascinating story that when these codexes were found, there are 13 different books, collections of these texts. And one of them, you might know this, was smuggled out of Egypt to give to Jung as a birthday present. And it's actually known as the Jung Codex. So, very important relationship. And he saw that these stories, which didn't make it into the Bible, were both very fascinating as stories of Christianity, but incredibly illuminating as a psychological mirror of a blueprint of individuation. He saw them as confirmation of his own theories. And part of his own theoretical framework was this idea of coming into our full humanity, what he calls the self with a capital S, of connecting to our spiritual depth, but also integrating the masculine and the feminine, to integrate the ego with the shadow. All of these things he saw being reflected in these books and traditions of the ancient world, not unlike the Tao Te Ching, bringing balance and integration. So one of the words that was used to describe Mary Magdalene in these ancient 1st and 2nd century texts is the word anthropos. Now that word anthropos is at the root of our word anthropology. And sometimes anthropology is translated as the study of man, but actually the Greeks had two words. So we have andros, which is masculine, and anthropos, which is human. So one of the words that's used to describe Mary Magdalene is she who has become fully anthropos. And if we think of what that means, wouldn't we all want to be fully anthropos, to have balanced the masculine and the feminine, to have integrated our shadow, to have this full humanity available, connected to the luminous depths. That Mary Magdalene, the wisdom teacher, has been in a period of dormancy for centuries. Now, we can find her lurking in different places. I found her primarily hidden in Benedictine monasteries throughout the world, and in Celtic traditions in the islands and other places. But this image that Margaret Starberg talks about the feminine being asleep and being hidden, is definitely something that has emerged. Mary Magdalene has been, and the feminine has been lost through this process. There are some places where the traditions of Magdalene as a wisdom teacher never got lost and never got broken. And primarily this has been in France. The legends are that after the crucifixion, we know from the book of Acts, disciples went to different places. Peter and Paul went off to Rome, Philip went to Syria, Thomas went to India. And the tradition is that Mary Magdalene went to what was known as the shores of Gaul, or southern France at that time. And if you go throughout France, and if you have the eyes to see, you will see that she is still preserved throughout those regions as a figure of spiritual authority. This is Raphael's depiction of Mary Magdalene. And it's an interesting little costume that she's wearing. It's the same costume that Marie Antoinette would wear when she played shepherdess in Versailles. So if we play around with that phrase, the shepherdess, well, what does that signify? Well, Jesus was the good shepherd. Mary Magdalene is the shepherdess. The Lord is my shepherd. We have the bishop's staff that's here that Peter's holding, but it almost looks like Magdalene's holding it. She's looking straight at us. So Magdalene as a spiritual authority persisted throughout France. And there are pathways, many of them actually, the pathways that mark the Santiago Compostela that stretch from the 4 gateways in France and go through to Spain, where one can find all kinds of fascinating evidence hiding in cathedral windows and frescoes and paintings throughout. We even also have, peeking out, church writings, like this passage about Magdalene from a Dominican collection of the 14th century called Legend Auroria. She who is Mary Magdalene was illuminated by the light of Christ, with which after she illumined others. And in that, she chose the best part of the heavenly glory. She is called the light, for then she was illumined of perfect knowledge in thought. So we have references to her in these ways. And for those of you who aren't familiar, I strongly recommend that you read the Gospel of Mary. This is a text, again, recovered and translated in the 20th century, finally translated in the 20th century. But we know that it was a very important and widely disseminated text used by centuries of people, because we have copies from the 3rd century and copies from the 5th century in 2 different languages, in Coptic and in Greek. 3 copies, 2 languages, 2 centuries apart. Whenever we have that, we rejoice as biblical scholars, because it's so rare to find something so ancient. And in each of these, the portrayal again is of her as a fearless, compassionate teacher of wisdom, with whom Jesus entrusts with his message to carry to the other disciples. She is fully human. This is the image from Carl Jung's Red Book that shows the balanced mandala-like integration. And I want to turn now then to this idea of what Jung and his colleague, Toni Wolff, describes as an individuated human being, someone who has developed all 4 facets of their being. In the psychology and typology of the self, Carl Jung talks in the personality of there being these 4 domains. There is the element of thinking, the thinking capacity, the analytical part. There is the capacity, oh, by the way, as we go through this, then just notice the images that I have put together with this. One of Mary Magdalene's symbols throughout the centuries is the book. We see her with books over and over and over again, the light of contemplation, reading over and over and over again. Then there's the capacity for feeling, for valuing, for empathic connection. You may know that the very name Magdalene in the Old English was pronounced maudlin. Maudlin. And if you look up a definition of maudlin, it means deeply emotional and sentimental. And so we will actually see rivulets of tears pouring down her face as her capacity to value, to feel and value human relationship and depth of emotion. So here, the tears are actually painted on the statue. And then there's the quality of physical sensation. And I will tell you that I believe Mary Magdalene to be the most embodied person depicted in all of Christian art. I'm going to show you a series of images later on in which you will see her physically, viscerally expressing every range of affect. So this is a statue by Rodin called The Passion of God. And it includes sexuality. So she is, as far as I know, except for the ones who are being tortured to death, which unfortunately I saw way too many of in Italy this summer, but she is really the only laudable Christian woman who is depicted naked. You know, there's Eve, but Eve's the gateway of all evil. So she's the only saint who we typically see depicted sexually. And then we have the quality of intuition, the connection to the spiritual realm, in which she is literally lifted up by the song of angels connected to the numinous realm. So these four dimensions, the intellect, the thinking, feeling, sensation, and intuition, she is represented visually in all of those ways. In all of those ways. Legends that after she arrived on the shores of Provence, the angels would feed her with the songs of angels in the spiritual realm. And then if we think about introversion and extroversion, we will also see Magdalene with both sides. We see her with images of extroverted preaching. This is, again, a depiction of her from the Golden Legend, where it said that the words of her tongue were so mellifluous and filled with honey that anyone hearing her would be converted. So she is the preacher here, the halo above her. And we can find image after image, and isn't this interesting, of Magdalene in a pulpit, sometimes a makeshift pulpit like this in the woods, where there she is proclaiming the gospel. Sometimes, as in the stained glass window, there she is with the words almost like music flowing out of her mouth while the audience is listening in rapt attention. Or here, standing on top of a rock, preaching to the fishermen in Marseille. But we also have the images of Magdalene as the introverted contemplative, the one who is deep in meditation, inward looking. And I would say then that she is also what I would call Our Lady of the Shadow. I think it's pretty fascinating. I just want to touch one thing about Judaism and the Jewish tradition here. I did one workshop in the South at one point where I began and I said, there's very little that we can be sure about with Jesus, but one thing that we are sure about is that he was Jewish. And a woman said, I think that's a matter of debate. But Jesus was Jewish, and his disciples were Jewish, and his mother was Jewish. It was a Jewish culture. Christianity began as a Jewish sect that St. Paul brought to the Gentiles. That's fundamental church history. And in Jewish tradition, the act of intimacy and sexuality is actually revered. It's very sacramental. It's held as a very holy thing. And Christianity, as it emerged and became Romanized, began to see sexuality as a very dangerous and actually sinful thing. So in that 4th century, the doctrine of original sin and the eating of the apple, at that very moment, I find it just not coincidental that at the very moment that Christianity becomes anti-sex, Mary Magdalene becomes the person who holds the adulterous banner and the prostitute banner. She becomes the bearer of the collective shadow, what was being cut out of Christianity. She becomes the person who holds it. Now, throughout the centuries, she's fulfilled this role in many different ways. So during a rationalistic age, we have this proliferation of images of her just weeping and sorrowful and extremely emotional. So when the emotions were being cut off, Magdalene appears visually more emotional. When the body was being cut off, Magdalene appears as the person who carries the collective shadow throughout history. And I find that endlessly fascinating. Now, Jung's companion Toni Wolff looked at feminine development across the centuries. She actually was going back to the ancient Greek society and looking at the structures of the female psyche and saying that women tended to identify with one particular role that were possible roles in the ancient Greek world. So she wrote this very important paper called The Structures of the Feminine Psyche. And in it, she talks about there being these 4 different archetypal patterns. And one of them comes from the Amazons of the ancient world, the fierce woman warriors, those ones who would be so fierce that they would cut off their breasts so that they could shoot arrows with better accuracy. The women who rode on horseback, these physically fit, well, big Wonder Woman, if you will, just the Amazonian race. And it turns out that Mary Magdalene has fulfilled this role psychologically. This is also connected to women who are at the forefront of political action, women who fight against injustice, women who are willing to go to crusade for things. And we look at the fearless leader archetype, and we see that very, very vividly, particularly in the Gospel of Mary. In that passage, towards the end, Peter turns to Magdalene and he says, "You know things that we don't know, because Jesus has given you secret teachings. Would you now tell us what you have known?" And she does. She gives him the discourse of the message she had received. And at the end of that, Peter and Andrew says, "These things are too different. These are too different from the things that we've taught. Could we believe her? Did he really prefer this woman to us?" And they have this debate, and one of the other disciples, Levi, comes to Magdalene's defense and says, "Peter, you are always hot-tempered and irascible, and now you're attacking her like our enemies do." So we see this leadership confrontation. And there's some fascinating books on the back table about the power dynamics of leadership between the Church of Peter and the Church of Magdalene. And that's a whole fascinating story. The other thing that I find really interesting about this is I have encountered a community that traces themselves back in a lineage to Mary Magdalene. And the claim is they're known as the Canova community. There are chapters in France and Scotland and Ireland and the United States. And their spiritual pathway, which they trace back to Mary Magdalene, begins with the very same kind of training that the Amazon women did. Girls at the age of 9 are taught to ride horses and shoot arrows and throw pickaxes, and they have this physical training, and they are part Amazon as well as their spiritual tradition. And they claim that this goes back to the teachings that they received in France way back in the 1st century. Then Toni Wolff talks about the medial. This is a word that means the mystic, if you will. The mystic, the one who's really deeply connected to her intuitive, dreaming faculties. And we have the image of Mary Magdalene having visions. There's great debate when she encounters Jesus in the garden. Is it a physical resurrection, or is it a visionary experience? And in the Gospel of Mary, we have her talking about a vision that she had as well. So certainly Magdalene, the vision, is prominent. Then we have one of the few, I heard the phrase consort in here. And this, of course, has been one of the roles that is most hotly contested and has been brought again to the forefront since the Da Vinci Code and other books. This question of did they or didn't they, and were they lovers, and boy, that has sold a lot of books, I'll tell you. And I'm certainly not going to answer that for you, but I will just say that it is a story that one finds peeking through the shadows throughout different time periods. The Hetaira role in ancient Greece was the sensual consort. In ancient Greece, actually it's pretty interesting to note, it's like the Venetian courtesans or the Japanese geisha. That would be this archetype. And it's a fascinating archetype because they were the most cultured and educated women. In the case of Venetian courtesans, the only women who were allowed in the library were the courtesans. So on the one hand, they were very cultured and artistic, but there was also that quality of sensuality that's implied with being a high-class courtesan. So the image that you see on the left is an image from the Netherlands. There was a whole community of people who were anonymous. Some people think that they were women painters, anonymous women painters, and they were called the masters of the female half-blank. How's that for a mouthful? And what you see here is you see a woman who has the jar of ointment on the left. That's Magdalene's jar. And she is holding a lute. The lute was the instrument of the courtesans. And she is playing music, and it's identified as being Mary Magdalene. And she's also wearing green sleeves, which in the North was a symbol that you were a high-class prostitute. We have a little remnant of that, by the way, in the song, Green Sleeves. Alas, my love, you do me wrong. That song was a song about a man who was infatuated with a courtesan. So here we have this on the left, so that image. On the right is an image by the Catholic sculptor and artist Eric Gill. And it's an image called The Nuptials of God. So a very evocative image that we have there. So throughout history, we do find, I think that was in 1917, so very pre-Dan Brown, we will find over and over and over again images of a very erotic relationship with Jesus there that connotes that element. And in our own time, the mother archetype has also come to the forefront. This is, of course, the hinge on which Da Vinci Code hangs, but there are other books out there as well, The Moon Under Her Feet, or The Expected One, in which the plot line depends on Magdalene being the mother of Jesus' children. So again, I'm going to go back to that question I said in the beginning. I could spend hours and hours and hours telling you what I think based on my dissertation and all of these hundreds of books and places I've been, but actually that's a less interesting question. Because I think really the most interesting question I'm going to turn to is invite you to notice two things. Just notice how interesting it is that a historical figure embodies all of these different things. I mean, isn't that fascinating that we have? There's so few images of wholeness and integration that we have. Isn't it fascinating that if we look at the great swath of history, here in this one figure, we have someone who has been all of these things to different people in different countries at different times. I find that fascinating. Really fascinating. How you can be saint and whore at the same time. How you can be prostitute and mother at the same time. You know, just really fascinating to call us into wholeness. And then the second thing is then this invitation for you to look and say, who is she for you? Who is Mary Magdalene for you? Which of these archetypes really resonate, really speak to you? And in that lineage that I was talking about Magdalene carrying the collective shadow of our times, I do find it fascinating that at the very moment when marriage is at an all-time low, the collective hunger and desire for who, the answer to the question, who is Mary Magdalene, is so many people want her to be Mrs. Jesus. So many people want her to be Mrs. Jesus. That's like so important to her that this archetype of the mother and the wife is one that people are so hungry for. And we haven't quite solved the debate. Some of you might have read the news a few years ago that there's this tiny little papyrus fragment that was being called as the Gospel of Jesus' wife because of two little sentences. There's a raging debate about whether it's a fraud, whether it's real. I mean, that will go on for a while. But I think it's just interesting that everybody is so hungry for this answer. At the very moment when marriage is such an imperiled institution, and where I might suggest that the role of wife has had less credence in our culture than it's ever had. I've met a number of women who are embarrassed because if you ask them, well, what do you do? And they say, oh, I'm just a wife. They feel like there's some social shame around that now. So at the very moment where that is being pushed down in the culture, everybody wants Mary Magdalene to be Mrs. Jesus. Just like in the 4th through 6th century as sexuality was being pushed down, everybody wanted her to be a prostitute and adulteress. Just something to consider. Something to consider. And she has been this shadow figure. And occasionally we get images. This was a very problematic opera. Oh, I could talk a very long time about this. I was in fact brought in to address some of the backstory after the opera had been written. She did it before. But in that image, then, Mark Adamo is not alone in wanting to have the image of Mary Magdalene as bride be the focus. That I know of at least 8 dissertations that have been written in the past 3 years of Mary Magdalene as bride. So there is a collective hunger for this. All of you unions can have a discussion on why that is. But I do find that really fascinating. So let's pause again, because again, before we go into the next tradition of France and pilgrimage and some of the fascinating things that are being recovered and emerging, I'd like to invite a little discussion amongst you about which of the archetypes are stirring in you and what surprises you about what you might have heard in this segment of our time together. So let's take 5 minutes for that, shall we? To have a chance to process. Yes, there's a hand right there.
I don't understand. If Christ was a Jew, how did Judaism and Christianity become so separate?
How did Judaism and Christianity become so separate? Yeah, that's a long and painful story. There was essentially a Jewish Christian movement in Jerusalem. There was an enormous destruction of the temple and Jewish culture. There was basically an effort to wipe out a lot of the Jews by the Romans in the 1st century. They went in diaspora, and at the same time, Paul, who hadn't known Jesus during Jesus' lifetime, actually became the founder of Christianity. He's what brought this Jewish cult into the Gentile world, and disciples spread. So that's a really long, deep conversation, but by the 2nd century, they were going in different directions. Other questions? Yes?
I'm fascinated by Mary Magdalene at the tomb.
Mm-hmm.
So the difference between Jesus saying, "Do not touch me," or "Do not cling to me."
Mm-hmm.
When I hear the story and I see Mary Magdalene, and when she realizes that this is Jesus, I see her running. I see them running to each other and embracing. It's hard for me to imagine him putting out his hand and saying, "Archie, I'm too holy."
Yeah, okay. So there's so many different interpretations of this particular scene. And one of them hinges around this question about what kind of body did he have, you know? And some people have suggested, he says, "Do not cling to me, for I have not yet ascended." So this question about, well, could you even do that? Was there substance to hold on to or not? Or in France, they have a tradition. You go to a place called Saint Maximin la Baume. There's a skull, and the skull goes back to the 1st century. They verified that. And the skull had this little tiny piece of skin that was on top of the forehead until I think it was the 18th century, and then they moved it and something fell off. But their tradition is that is where Jesus touched her on the forehead and said, "Do not cling to me." So it would be a fun experiment to play, to have this scene enacted multiple ways, right? To see what would the possibilities of that scene look like. It could be very, very different. And we've just seen some of the visual depictions, cookies, right? Versus some of them, there's this deep, deep tenderness as he's doing that. And there's a beautiful poem, I wish I had it all memorized, by Rilke, called "The Risen One." And write that down, go look it up, The Risen One by Roca, about how he's forbidding her to touch him because he wishes to make of her the lover who ascends even beyond the beloved's voice. How's that for a line? That's pretty yummy, isn't it? He wishes to make of her the lover who ascends even beyond the beloved's voice. Ooh, juicy, The Risen One by Roca. Yes, Teresa?
I'm curious about the different way that Mary, the mother of Jesus, has become so revered in contrast to Mary Magdalene, who has become this image of, at least like myself growing up Catholic, as a prostitute, as someone who's a sinner.
Yeah, both of them moved away from being human and they became one untouchably pure, and the other one corrupt, right? So they both were divorced from their humanity in different ways. There's some good resources I can give you. Mary Through the Centuries is one. My favorite Mary Magdalene book is the one that's called Myth and Metaphor by Susan Haskins. Mary Magdalene's book, so comprehensive. One of those books you'll just underline, like Susan Haskins, Haskins. And it's nice to read that book right next to Mary Through the Centuries, and Jan, J-A-N-N is the first name, I'm forgetting the last name, and to look at that evolution of those two. Yes, last one.
So I'm fascinated by the way that it seems that an archetype of wholeness, as embodied in Mary Magdalene, breaks down into these four different parts.
Yeah.
And it seems like that's a process of one component or another being cast off the shadow.
I would agree with that. And I would say that we are now in a time where bringing them all together is the task.
That's interesting. So I was thinking about what you were saying about how the mother or bride archetype is kind of particularly, I can just sort of identify with that idea that to say I'm just a mother or I'm just a wife is not something that's
Socially acceptable.
Socially acceptable, yeah, in any or most circles, I'd say. And there is a way also that I think being a leader as a woman is becoming, I'm thinking about Me Too, I'm thinking about just young women, how maybe there's some more space for that suddenly. My question is, where do you see the mystic or medial woman or archetype?
Where do you see the mystic or medial? Very often it is in the arts that have held the mystic realm. As we become a more and more rational age where we dismiss that sort of visionary experience as, oh, you need some Prozac, that the arts seem to be the one that carries that quality. And look around, in this very room, I would say the medial archetype is well represented by artwork there. So what do we think about the mother archetype and how Magdalene has held that? You could look at the mother archetype literally as the mother of children, but also the mothering capacity. So one of the things that links her, for example, is Catherine of Siena, and Teresa of Avila, when she died, her mother died, she had a vision that the Virgin Mary came to her and said, I give you a new mother now, and gave her Mary Magdalene as her spiritual guide. So, and at different times, actually, I read a reference that said the original Mother Goose was supposed to be Mary Magdalene. She was seen as having all of these little ducklings, spiritual mystics follow behind her. That was a nickname for her. So think about the mothering energy and think of that as the archetype there that enfolds everyone in unconditional love. That's one of the principles of mother energy. How Mary Magdalene has also held that idea that no matter who you are, no matter what you have done, come and I will hold you close and cherish you as my beloved child. That's actually been a message that many people have gotten in dreams and visions. I've collected a bunch of them from doing pilgrimages. It's interesting how that voice comes up so much. Did that help answer that
Yeah.
question? Great.
Very
Good. I want to turn now to just show you some symbols of Mary Magdalene. When I first began on this quest, my daughter was 7 years old, and I realized soon on that a lot of the information I was seeking wasn't in books, although I read hundreds of them. I actually found as much important information looking at art and looking at architecture and going to holy sites and finding oral traditions. That was equally important to me. So I don't know how many of you have tried to go with a 7-year-old to an art museum.
I've been a 7-year-old being taken to that.
So, you can relate then to this story, so I thought, oh my gosh, how am I going to buy myself some more time, right? And there's this a series of children's books called Where's Waldo? And Waldo has this little funny hat, and kids pore over them for hours trying to find where Waldo is. So I decided we would play Where's Mary Magdalene? And I told her what to look for, what the symbols were of Mary Magdalene. And it got me hours in the Uffizi Gallery. And it got me hours in the Louvre. And she would go in front of the painting and she would look at the crowd scene. Where's the woman with the red dress and the long hair? And we would go, and it was godsend. So this list is for you to play Where's Mary Magdalene? And the artwork across the centuries. Because as we've already seen, sometimes she's not identified by name, and if you're in a crowd scene, not everybody is named. And if you know the list of her symbols, you'll have a better chance of finding her. So I'm gonna give you a list, and then we're gonna go through a bunch of images, and as we go through the images, I want you to, first of all, appreciate the extraordinary diversity of this. Extraordinary diversity of how she's being depicted. And secondly, I'm going to invite you to notice and hold on to any image that particularly grabs your heart. We're going to have the homework, we're going to have to share with somebody what was the image that spoke most to you. So just pay attention to that, okay? So we're going to see tower. According to some people, her name, Magdalene, means tower. Jesus loved to give nicknames, just like St. Francis did. You might remember that he calls Simon Peter. He gives him a new name. Peter means rock or stone. According to some sources, it can be colloquially translated as blockhead as well. Go figure there. But Magdalene meaning tower of strength, which certainly she was. The color red in the southern European countries, she's almost always depicted wearing red. In some of the northern European countries, you'll see her with green sleeves, as I've already said, depicting a courtesan. Feet, if you're looking for her in a crowd scene, she will be at Jesus' feet. She will be wiping his feet with her hair. She'll be cradling his feet. Nudity, as I said before, she is one of the only, and sometimes the only, woman saint who is depicted in a state of full undress, as was Jesus, by the way. What does that mean to be naked truth? Loose hair, we have that to imply both a loose woman, a woman who would let her hair down, but also it means unbound if we flip it. We think about what is it? Magdalene is the only woman not identified as something else. Everybody else is somebody's mother, somebody's sister, somebody's wife. Magdalene stands alone as Mary Magdalene. The open book, the alabaster jar of spikenard and healing and anointment, tears and emotion, the skull, able to look death in the face, the candle, the flame, the dove of peace, and the egg. What's the one I think about the dove? It's interesting how we pick what our symbols are throughout time. If you're going to pick what is the symbol for your group, what do you choose? And it's really interesting to look at what were the symbols that were chosen in the first few centuries of Christianity. And there are a wide diversity of symbols. Some of the symbols were flowers. Some of the symbols were doves. The one that it became identified with as the crucifix, but there are communities of alternative Christians throughout France in particular who said that they would no more identify with the cross. The cross was a symbol of torture. Why would we celebrate the symbol of torture rather than the dove of peace or the flower of what it means to come into our full humanity? And no more than you would wear an electric chair around your neck. So the dove, very much associated with her. So we'll look through these and again pay attention to things. The diversity of images, just appreciate how differently she's appearing in these. And notice which one surprises you or moves you emotionally. And you will find her as the most embodied, emotionally expressive person in the Grounds of Passion. Every race and every age So I'm going to invite you now, just for those, that little sampling. I actually have 600 images I've collected from art galleries and artists around the world. But just from that little sampling right there, notice which one spoke to you. And just tell a little bit about that if you would to somebody next to you. looks about 22. Right? And she has a smooth, unlined face. And for centuries, the depiction, no matter whether Gabriel is coming to tell her she's going to be pregnant with God's child or cradling her dead son, she's got such serene composure in her face, right? Beautiful, beautiful images. But I would say that the bandwidth of emotional expression is rather narrow, right? Same with the other saints. We get them usually depicted at one age with one kind of affect. And with Mary Magdalene, she is voluptuous, she's haggard, she's skinny, she's old, she's young, she's new. And so many fascinating images. I just want to point out, this is by my friend Sue Ellen Parkinson. And she's one of the few women who more and more is depicted in her old age wisdom as well as in her youth. This is called the healing circle. And I love that Sue Ellen painted this after she took a workshop with me. So all throughout are symbols from the workshop that we talked about. But here she is with her red cloak in the center of honor as she should be. So we're seeing so many images coming forward now. But even if we were to just look at the historical images, how different they've been, right? Every race, every color hair, every expression, she really is every woman. When I do this as a week-long or weekend workshop, it takes about an hour and a half just to go through the images with just 15 seconds an image to do it with music. And it's a pretty profound experience to realize, she's been everyone. She's me too, as Stacy said. Me! She's me too. It's really amazing. And so we have the text, like in Nag Hammadi, as Magdalene as Anthropos, is fully human. But I also think we have this extraordinary visual record of the centuries and centuries in all these different countries with Magdalene in all these facets of what it is to be human. So any comments or questions before we go to the next piece? Yeah.
Just to comment on the pictures, I was noticing it was like the second or the third image where she was in a red dress and her arms were kind of flailing to the sides, and noticing the difference between images in Christianity of pure women who are seen as so tightly bound and contained versus this opposite side, which is much more erotic. It's like the purity versus the erotic in that image.
Yeah, so I think one of the reasons why Magdalene speaks to so many people too is, I don't know how many of us are going to be virgins for the rest of our life, in our lives. She is the one who actually, whether, even though it was a historical misinformation, somehow archetypally holds sensuality and spirituality and the intellect. And don't we need that? Oh my gosh, don't we need an image of a woman who is all of the above? And we do get that. We do get this image of a total person who has both intense eroticism and intense spirituality, who is a saint. Who is a saint. Yes.
I've always been, ever since I sort of grew up, this whole thing with the other Mary, this Virgin Mother thing, it's just like bizarre that, and it kind of became, in the creeds and stuff, just like, somehow you can be really, really held up as absolutely the best. If you can be a virgin and a mother.
Forever.
Virgin and a mother.
Forever.
A virgin and a mother.
Yeah, that's a whole other class. That's a whole big long class, how that evolved. And it's a pretty disturbing story, actually. It's a pretty disturbing story. I think there's one other. John?
Well, I was struck by the image of, I guess it's Magdalene, reading a book while almost entirely naked.
Yeah.
And
The sexy scholar. Isn't that kind of cool that you can have both together? I personally love that.
well, the thing that's striking that is, a week ago at my church retreat, on our Saturday night party, I told this joke I know that involves two guys doing some very technical philosophical tomes at a nudist colony. Anybody wants to hear it, see me afterwards, please.
Yeah.
Okay, but the joke relies on the jarring juxtaposition of reading these technical philosophical texts while naked. But then it struck me the contrast between that joke and this painting, because it's very much not a jarring juxtaposition in that painting.
But Magdalene has one of the central tenets about, Jungian psychology is this tension of the opposites. And that you have that alchemical tension, and that is what leads to transcendence and transformation. And I would actually say, John, that Mary Magdalene has held jarring juxtapositions throughout the centuries. And that she has been a figure who's catalyzed enormous things by having things that we don't think. I was a little kid with blue, thick glasses in the library, and being a nerd is not usually considered sexy. But Magdalene, when you look at these texts of Nag Hammadi in particular, Peter's complaining that she's talking all the time. Do we have any Harry Potter fans? She's Hermione Granger. She's like, I know the answer, I know the answer, I know the answer. And Peter and the guys are like, she's always talking. She's always talking. She's not giving any of us another chance. But we have that, the nerdy girl who has all the answers and the incredibly hot Playboy centerfold in one. Now, I don't agree with them all, but I think it's an interesting idea to see that she's holding everything. And just notice what it does in us to hold that much of the capacity of being human. Did you have it?
Yes. Okay, first of all, I believe the image of Mary Magdalene naked reading the book was probably painted by a male. I'm just saying. The book, yes, always the book. Always the book. It doesn't matter which book it is true, the book. Red, fuchsia, yes. Green, teal, yes. Always a subset. Love, yes. A mother, yes. Compassion, yes. Understanding, yes. Will go to bat for her children, yes. And if you're God's, you are hers. And wear many hats, yes, yes, yes. You cannot box her in. A free spirit, yes, yes, yes. Always yes, because things come in dreams. People come, folks from the book come, family come, missions come. Yes, yes, yes. All the other craziness, no, no, no. Mary Magdalene is not a whore. And in the virgin sense, it's not the world's definition of it, but it is a sense of celibacy, because when you're celibate, you get to a place where you can just be at peace. You don't have outside distractions. You don't have anything. It's just you and your time with God, just in God's presence. So you can be led and you can be guided, and everything you need, you have everything you need to understand. You have wherever you are, whatever issues you have in the present moment, and you're praying about, God hears, God knows, God answers. Woo, that's me.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to do this last piece before we're done. There's two pieces more to see. And one of them is this idea that actually, historically, and I just allowed free rein with images because we see the images speak to us differently. You trusted the image, that the image would come in your dreams to give you what you needed. And that what I trust is whatever image calls to you has deep wisdom for you to mine. So I'll just tell you what I do in workshops, and you can go home and do it. That when we have longer time, I ask people to pick two images. One that they are drawn to, that they feel an affinity for, that they look at and they go, yes, 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 you are this one for me. And to pick the image that most repels them. This is shadow work. And then to do a journaling exercise with each of these images and ask the image, like active imagination, to say, what do you want to tell me? And have the image actually speak to you and say, this is what I want you to know. And I'll just tell you, from 15 years of doing this, believe me, I have a ton of images that I have been so resistant to that I absolutely hated. I could not stand at Magdalene the prostitute, Magdalene the naked person. But I will tell you that working with the images in a depth psychology Jungian way has given me so much insight. And over and over and over again, I've seen the same thing in people who've been on pilgrimage. Some of you who've been on pilgrimage are nodding your head, that you know that this is a very deep process. So larger discussion, but just an invitation. Try it out, see what happens if you do this. Ask the image what it wants to tell you, okay? So that's the depth psychology piece. I'm gonna give you one last piece of history now. And this has to do with the proliferation of what I like to call the contemplative tree. One of the great surprises of my life when I began on this particular journey is I thought Mary Magdalene was over here, and some other aspects of contemplative spirituality were over here. In particular, I had been introduced to the spirituality of St. Benedict and Benedictine spirituality, and I started doing a number of retreats. And it turns out that she is what I would call the roots of the contemplative tree. So sometimes the great Oxford scholar Jeremy Durham talks about there being this split in Christianity between the hierarchical church and what he calls the silent monastic rebellion. The rebellion that was against hierarchy and was instead focused on internal development through practice. I'm just going to share a couple of things about this with you because I think it's a fascinating history. I said before, symbols are important. Symbols are important. And I'll just tell you right now that as you go through the world, keep your eyes out for this so-called flower of life symbol, the 6-petaled flower circumscribed in a circle. That is a symbol that very often has designated an alternative pathway of Christianity that traces itself back to Mary Magdalene. We actually have that image. I don't know how many of you know this, but in Israel right now, they have been doing some excavations in the town of Magdala. And I'm just going to show you. I was working on this material for years before this became public. In this first century synagogue, it's a little hard to see right here, but that 6-petaled flower is on the top right here of the altar. You can see in the corner that the symbol where it says Magdala is the 6-petaled flower circumscribed. If you go to Rome and you go to the earliest Christian catacombs, that's the symbol in the catacombs of Domitilla. Over and over and over, you can find this symbol as a marking place, as a marker. So what I'm going to show you are the places that I have, some of the many places I have traveled to in the world that have a deep connection with Mary Magdalene and a kind of spiritual pathway that's deeply alive with the tradition of the Desert Fathers and Mothers in Egypt, with the tradition of some of this monastic spirituality, and in fact with the Gospel of Mary. So you can see that 6-petaled flower here at the baptismal font. This is in a Cistercian church in Provence. And what happened, as best we can discover, this region that has been associated with Mary Magdalene coming and bringing Christianity to this region, southern France, was known as Gaul. This is the map of the Celts. The Gaul, Galatians, and Gaelic are all connected here together in one etymological root. And it turns out that the pathway of Mary Magdalene stretches from southern France up into these Gaelic islands, that you can actually historically trace an evolution of Christianity from southern France, through France, into the British Isles, over to Ireland, and up to Iona. And in France, in England, you will find references of Magdalene in different places, Magdalene College in Oxford, founded by the Franciscans. But be on the alert for her name, because you will find it everywhere. And look as well for that symbol of this 6-petaled flower. This is in the Lorenz Abbey in France here. So let me just show you a couple things. Throughout France, there are all of these pilgrimage trails. And many of them have been neglected, and you don't find this information except in the tourist, not the tourist guide, but the visitor center, or literally on the trails themselves in the chapel, over and over and over and over again. You will find Magdalene Church, Magdalene Church, Magdalene Church. And many of them are leading to this place that is known as La Sainte Baume, Saint Baume. And this is the place, according to French tradition, we have historical records going back to the end of the 2nd century. So historical records, 2nd century, about 1st century origins, that after the crucifixion, Mary Magdalene arrived on the shores of France and preached and taught. Those images I showed you of her preaching and teaching. And she then, according to the stories, retired up here to this holy mountain. Now the forest had been dedicated to the Greek goddess Artemis for 700 years. So it was a place that was layered with the sacred feminine. And as you go through this forest of trees, up through this mountain, it's beautiful. It's this silent zone. It's very, very special. All that you hear of the sound of birds. You come to this gateway, this threshold, steep. And as you climb the steps, you find the gateway. And at the gateway, what you discover is right here, this plaque, right there, says that this was the monastery established in the year 415. It's that old as a monastery. Now, it was established here to tend the relics of Mary Magdalene. And it was established by a man, some of you priests will recognize the name John Cassian. He is a saint in the Eastern tradition who had gone to the deserts of Egypt in that 4th century to the very monastery near the Nag Hammadi library. And he had observed the spiritual practices of the desert fathers and mothers, and he was entrusted to establish a model of a life that would tune you to being in attunement with the divine. He came to this particular place in France and established the world's first double monastery with these teachings. And here, if you go on pilgrimage, you will go into the caves where Mary Magdalene was said to have prayed and meditated the last 30 years of her life. The Cassionite monks were there for centuries. Those became the Benedictine monks, and now it's the Dominicans. But it's an almost unbroken lineage, except for the French Revolution. Throughout France, there are sites then that are named for Mary Magdalene, and deeper. This is the one in the Dordogne, near the caves of Lascaux, where all of those objects were found. And you go into the chapel here, and you will find the statue lit by light. Now, the history of the monastic movement passes from John Cassian, who writes a book while he's in the caves of Mary Magdalene. St. Benedict comes along a few centuries later. He says, I'm going to write a little rule book for beginners. And the last chapter says, if you want to learn more about the spiritual life, you need to go read the books by John Cassian. Where did John Cassian write those books? In the caves of Mary Magdalene. So throughout here, there are these stories there that come. And we find over and over and over, any fans of Andy Goldsworthy, the sculptor? Rivers and Tides, saw that movie? Well, this image just got me so much I had a lump in my throat. And I went to France searching, what the heck is that? And it was only when I was on the trail that I discovered that all of these images of were being created on something known as the Trail of Time. And it was only after I had hiked 7 miles in that I found this, which turns out to be the Magdalene Chapel that had been part of these pilgrimage routes for centuries upon centuries for people who were traveling throughout Europe to go to the caves of La Baume. And inside we have something that could look like a tomb or it could look like a chrysalis, right? An amazing image at night when it's lit up. And all of these pilgrim paths end up converging on this holy mountain. This holy mountain is where Catherine of Siena went on her knees to pray for strength before she confronted the Pope at Avignon to tell him that he had done the wrong thing. These are the caves that St. Francis of Assisi had gone into as he walked the Camino Santiago Compostela on his way from Basilica. These are the holy caves in the mountains that the great kings of Europe went to. They were the caves that St. Patrick went to. It turns out, I had to go to Ireland to find this. St. Patrick, patron saint who brought Christianity to Ireland, was abducted by pirates from Britain to Ireland. But when he decided he was going to become a monk, he went and he studied at an island off of France, where they would walk on pilgrimage on the feast day of Mary Magdalene to the caves of Baume. And that's what he brought with him. So it's a bigger story than we can really encompass today, but what I've discovered, to my utter shock and amazement, is that there are at least two stories of Christianity in Europe. There is the story of the lineage of Peter that became rather hierarchical, where women were pushed away. And there is an alternative story that existed and proliferated that was very much in the spirit of Mary Magdalene throughout much of this region. And it turns out that so many of the great Christian saints that are revered, like St. Benedict and like St. Patrick and like John Cassian, all came here to study, to learn how to find a spiritual life attuning the soul. It's very, very much in line with the teaching that's in the Gospel of Mary. So throughout France, there are these images of pilgrimage throughout these trails over and over and over again, where one can find, hidden in the shadows, another story. Now I mentioned dreams and visions and how they're appearing everywhere and they're speaking to people. I will tell you that I have met, let me count now, I've met 11 people who are absolutely convinced that they are the reincarnation of Mary Magdalene and not mine. And I've met about 7 who think that they're Mary Magdalene's reincarnated daughter. So there's all kinds of images that are floating around everywhere. And a good Jungian depth psychologist would look at that and say that there's rich material here for personal development. So I'm going to tell you about some of the dreams that happened that created another monastery. But I'm seeing some faces that look slightly perplexed, so I'm going to pause first and say, next question, Sammy Shelby Bar, some of the relics of Mary Magdalene are. Yes, Teresa.
To clarify something about St. Patrick, so
Yeah.
St. Patrick is so often credited with Christianity being brought to Ireland.
Yes.
You're saying that Mary Magdalene was in Ireland first? Is that
No, although the Irish people will tell you that. There are some versions of that. Let me pull up I'm missing one slide that I wanted to make out of order, so I want to show this one little sequence. St. Patrick was English, and he was abducted by pirates, and he was sold into slavery in Ireland itself. But when he escaped, after his escape, he decided he wanted to study Christianity, and he would become a monk. This is the place that he went to become a monk. It's called Lorenz Abbey. It's on an island called Ile on a Rock off the coast of Caen. So they will tell you both in Ireland and here at this abbey, which was established in the 5th century, that this is where St. Patrick came. So we have that historically verified in 2 different sites. This is where he became a monk, and the monks of this region were withdrawn monks. They were very hermit-like, but every year they would go on pilgrimage to walk to the caves of Magdalene, which were close by for her feast day, which has been one of the highest celebrated feast days. Now from this abbey, there are stories that St. Patrick took this form of Christianity to the British Isles. This is an image of Mary Magdalene with the 7 demons that are being expelled from her. And it's the image of a very ancient chapel that is on the ruins of Glastonbury Abbey in England. So the story that they tell is that St. Patrick studied in France, became a monk, then he came to England where he was a bishop in Glastonbury in this chapel, right here. This is known as Magdalene Chapel. For those of you who've been in Glastonbury, you'll recognize this. And it is on Magdalene Street, which is where the ruins of Glastonbury Abbey are. From there, after England, he went up into Ireland. And in Ireland, there are a series of monastic establishments, in particular the Aran Islands and Skellig Michael. Each of these particular monastic communities, it's puzzled people for a very long time because they are often called something the desert. Now, if you've been to Ireland, it rains a lot. You wouldn't call it the desert. But what it's actually a reference to is the desert spirituality from Egypt that John Cassian had brought to France, to Baume, where Mary Magdalene's caves are, where St. Patrick studied, where he developed the tradition that he took to England, that he took to Ireland, that flourished in the remote outposts. And a great book to read about how so much wisdom of the ancient world survived during the destruction of most of this is Thomas K. Hill's How the Irish Saved Civilization. And that book talks about the importance of these Benedictine monasteries as preserving the writing and the books. What they don't tell you is that the lineage can be traced all the way back to southern France, to that first monastery that John Cassian established. So there's a whole, I would just call it this whole contemplative tree that grows, and we see the flowering throughout the world in the monastic movements, but the roots are in that cave where Mary Magdalene prayed and meditated for 30 years in France, that centuries of pilgrims have come to, deep in devotion to bring forth a vision of Christianity that has sustained much of the world. It's a piece that was hidden in the shadows and was cut out of the picture, but is gradually being restored. Yes?
What's the six-petal flower?
The six-petal flower.
Does each of those petals have a particular symbol?
So that depends a lot on which lineage and tradition. The question was, are the six petals of the flower, do they have symbolism? There are six petals in the labyrinth at Chartres Cathedral, and those six petals have a tradition that each one of those represents a different kingdom. I can't verify that that's what that meant initially, so that they would go from the kingdom of the vegetable, the mineral, the animal, the human. So there are different ways of interpreting that. I just think it's fascinating that now, everywhere I go, I find this six-petal flower, and it goes back to the 1st century oldest Jewish synagogue that they found the ruins of in this Franciscan site in Magdala. And you can look, so we're not done with putting the pieces back to the story. I like to say that this is a puzzle that has more pieces than anything I've ever had in my life. And I've been spending 15 years collecting them, but I'm going to charge all of you to go collect more pieces of the puzzle, because it's going to take all of us to put it back, There's one more piece I do want to make reference to, and that is the Gospel of Mary. And in the Gospel of Mary, there is the visionary scene. And this is the text that was found again in the 20th century, 3 copies, that is reputed Mary Magdalene giving her vision to the disciples after their crucifixion and resurrection. And in it, Magdalene talks about a spiritual ascent. And in the ascent, she encounters powers of wrath and darkness. And as she encounters each one of these, she has to find a way to move through it, to transcend it. This text has some pretty remarkable parallels with the work that John Cassian wrote in the cave, where he talks about the 7 deadly sins, or what came to become known as the 7 deadly sins. And that one passage in the Gospel of Luke of Mary Magdalene had 7 demons cast out of her. And we saw that image just now of St. Patrick of the demons being expelled. Well, there's one way of looking at that, and those were each of these 7 deadly sins that each of us needs to expel from us as to become a thoroughly enlightened human being. In the preface to the Gospel of Mary, my favorite translation of this says then that for centuries this passage in Luke has been used to say she must have been a really bad person if she had 7 demons inside of her. But if we actually turn and look at it in the larger tradition, the tradition of for instance, the chakra system, like each of the chakras being opened and having the demon expelled, or the Dante tradition, in which Dante has 7 P's for peccatoria carved on his head, and as he ascends the mountain of transformation, each one disappears until he's ready to go into paradise. If we look at it in that framework, we would say that Mary Magdalene is, quote, the most thoroughly sanctified being in the New Testament outside of Jesus himself. So very interesting. Now that translation of the Gospel of Mary was one of the figures that I want to point to right now, because I said I would close with dreams. And in the dreams that I wanted to share, there was a spiritual director, Dominican spiritual director, who was here at the caves of Baume. And it was while he was here that he started to have these dreams and visions. And they told him that he needed to find this other place, a place that came to meet up with an Orthodox monk from the East. So a Russian Orthodox monk had a dream and a vision that he was supposed to go to France, and a Dominican spiritual director had a dream that he was supposed to find this Russian monk. And the two of them met up eventually, and they are part of a monastery that's only 30 years old, 35 years old now, called Saint-Michel du Var. And it is based on Bernard of Clairvaux's Tournai Abbey with its architecture. And inside this abbey now are some of the relics of Mary Magdalene. Her hair is there. And the man who was in the caves, his name is Jean-Yves, is one of the foremost translators of some of the texts, Gospel of Thomas, Gospel of Mary. And he was led to this place as a dream. The extraordinary iconography that you see is the result of an artist who was living in Uzbekistan. He was a scientist from a scientist-atheist family. And he encountered his first picture that he saw of an icon, and it just hit him in his heart, and he couldn't sleep until he went to a monastery in Uzbekistan, and for 7 years, he studied how to paint icons. The week that he was graduated, where his master said, "You are ready now," they got a call from the Russian monk and said, "Do you know anybody who could paint the walls of this monastery dedicated to Mary Magdalene?" And the image that you see then here is all about her arriving in the rudderless boat on the shores of France. And this image of her tall and towering with the red cloak that billows across the wall. I had been spending 10 years finding the connection of all these different saints throughout time to Mary Magdalene. I had found the connection of Benedict and Francis and Catherine of Siena and Teresa of Avila. And then through a series of incredible serendipities, one day I found this monastery. And I walked into the wall, into this building, and what did I find? The figure of Mary Magdalene, towering spiritual authority, with her mother's red cloak billowing all the way across the wall. And underneath we have Mary of Egypt, and Saint Benedict, and John Cassian, and over here, St. Francis of Assisi with even his wolf, and Hildegard of Bingen, and Teresa of Avila, and Catherine of Siena, all part of the spiritual legacy that goes back to that cave in France. This is the place I'd like to take you all. I would like to take you all on pilgrimage with me to Provence to walk in the footsteps of Mary Magdalene, to actually go to the island where St. Francis became a monk, to find the flower of life that's inscribed in all of these extraordinary buildings, to live a rhythm of life that was established first in the deserts of Egypt, a rhythm of life that said, each of us has the divine fingerprint inside our human heart. It is the seed of goodness. And if only we find a rhythm of life, a balance of song and study and silence together, and we will unfold in our glory to be like those six-petaled flowers, to be filled with sweetness, that we will come into our wholeness, that like Mary Magdalene, we too will become anthropos and can bring our light to the world. So I would love it if you're interested in coming on a pilgrimage or learning more. I'll pass 3 things around. And you can put your name on it because I'm going to be announcing the dates this next week. And there will be 3 different journeys in France and Provence, 2 for just women and 1 co-ed, that will go to these sites and will live this rhythm of song, silence, study, walking through the forest of Artemis, chanting in these incredible rooms where the echo and resonance is such you have no idea what a good singer you are until you sing in there. And to actually learn this deep tradition that has been hidden in the shadows but is now coming out to the forefront. A tradition that claims that what is deepest and most true in us is beauty, truth, and goodness. And that if only we tune ourselves, we will be capable, like Magdalene, of standing with both hands full, one able to look at the sorrow and the grief of the world with eyes of compassion, but also the other hand full, awake to beauty, claiming our humanity with love and joy. May it be so. We have a few more minutes for anything you might want to ask. Yes?
What do you know of the
Lacano.
You said there are 3 locations?
There's several locations. If you go on their website, LACANNEAU, and a book by their reader has been published that claims to be, those of you who know the Gospel of Mary know that it's missing some pages. Now, I'm not going to, I will tell you as a historian that I am not yet persuaded by the veracity of this claim, but I find it worth exploring. So she has published a book called The Gospel of the Beloved Companion, which she claims is the text that Mary Magdalene wrote herself that came from Egypt to France and was translated in the 13th century from Greek into Occitan, or the local dialect, the Provençal dialect, and that she translated 10 years ago. So it's worth exploring. It's a very inspiring text. It's mostly like the Gospel of John, with the Gospel of Mary and little bits of Thomas all put in one. It's a fascinating book, and their community says that this was the Gospel that they have used since the very beginning, tracing their lineage all the way back to the first century.
Community in Ireland, England, and the United States?
The United States is in Vermont. And then they had the leader of that, Jean de Clermont is her name. She does workshops, I've attended one, and she does speaking. So worth exploring, a very interesting story. Again, decide for yourself what's true, what's not, but worth exploring, very interesting. Jean de Clermont. And I believe I have a copy of that book on the back table.
What's the community called?
Lacano. It's an old French word meaning basically Gnostic or the knowing. Like culminate, to know, so lacano, the knowing. Other questions? Yes?
Will you talk a little bit about Basilica?
Oh, Basilica. I love Basilica. Basilica is an extraordinarily beautiful place. It's one of the 4 gateways of the Camino Santiago de Compostela. So if you're going to walk the whole Camino path, this is one of your options. It's the one that St. Francis did. And Vézelay has a very interesting history. There are two places that claim they have the relics of Mary Magdalene. Vézelay is one, and Maximin Saint-Baume is the other. Now the story goes that during Saracen invasions, there was a monk from Vézelay who came down, joined the monastery at Saint-Baume because he had a dream that he was supposed to do what's called a holy theft. And he, according to the story, he stole the bones of Mary Magdalene and brought them to Vézelay. There's been contention ever since as to who has the real bones of Mary Magdalene. But this I will tell you. First of all, it's one of the most beautiful Romanesque churches in the world. It is suffused with this soft golden pink light. It is a place of extraordinary beauty. And it also has a reawakened spiritual presence now. There's a beautiful young community of lay men and women who gather every night to sing Vespers, I think 3 times a day actually. And it's exquisite. And so if you can go to Vézelay too, it's so beautiful. And for me, it's holy ground. It is absolutely holy ground. I far prefer it to the church in St. Maximin, to be honest. If you were to pin me to a wall and say, which one is it? Where are her bones? I would say this. Vézelay feels like the cave at Baume. When you're in the cave, they have the same. It's the same sound. It's the same energy. So to me, it's a holy ground. But don't tell that to my friend Veronique, who's the tour guide at St. Maximin. She'll get very upset. Yes. Jean.
I see connections to the Black Madonna sites and Mary Magdalene.
Correct. The question is about Black Madonna sites and Mary Magdalene. And you will find some books, some written by French authors like Louis Charpentier, for example, who claim that all of the Black Madonnas that are in France are actually secret hidden depictions of Magdalene. That, of course, is a topic of great controversy. But that was a way of holding her presence as a hidden dark feminine. It's interesting. I'll just give you a couple pieces that are interesting associations. I find it fascinating to look at what the church has put in liturgy. I feel like those are more clues, that we get. And first of all, the Feast of Day of Mary Magdalene has always been celebrated. Always. Like, they cannot find a time when it was not celebrated. We know that it was celebrated as early as the 7th century in England, which is remarkable. We have historical records by the Venerable Bede talking about the Feast of Magdalene. And the liturgy of what was used is always about this theme of longing and yearning. So the psalm, for instance, the psalms that are appointed are, as the deer longs for the water brook, so yearns my soul for you, O God. Which was St. Patrick's song too. That's the one that he chose to do St. Patrick's birthday with. Or, O God, you have searched me out and known me. You know my inmost being. There's no place I can go where you are. Well, the Old Testament reading for liturgies is almost always, throughout history, the Song of Songs, which is, I am black, but I am beautiful. It is the great erotic love song. So they chose the most erotic part of the Bible to be her reading for the Old Testament. And some scholars have linked the black of the woman that is the beloved there with Magdalene. So play with that as you will. It's just, you'll find lots of people who find that association to be extremely suggestive. And again, I'm not making further comment on it, just interesting. Others? Yes?
When you were showing us the photographs of Magdalene being so tall compared to everybody else, I don't know if and taking everybody, I know I got to see it on VHS of Little Mermaid. And on the over, and I was
George Delatorre is there.
looking in the back walls, looking for the little tiny
Who she was and the importance that she had in the church and the way that she inspired people, especially during times of darkness. So I'm going to tell you one last story because I think it's an important story for us. It's important to remember. I encounter so much despair these days. I don't know about you. So much despair. I know that suicide is at an all-time high in both the elderly and in college campuses. There is a sense of fear and terror everywhere. it's important to remember that things actually have been worse. And one time when they were much worse was during the 14th century, during plagues. And in Florence, there was a plague so bad one summer that 2/3 of the population died in one summer. In one summer. And there weren't enough people to bury the bodies. There was rampant political corruption everywhere. There was violence at every level of government. The church had been betraying all of the citizens. This is what foments the Protestant Reformation, the selling of indulgences. And there was a group of lay people, people like us, ordinary people with jobs and with families. And they came together to create something that they called the confraternity. And they took as their mandate a couple of really important things. The first is that they were going to be willing to stand and minister to those who had died. They were going to take their bodies and bury them when nobody else, or when everyone else was so afraid they wouldn't touch them. The second thing that they were going to do is that they would tend to the liturgies of Maundy Thursday. They would bathe the feet of people with their tears and their love. And the third thing that they would do is that they would gather together and they would sing and they would dance. They did all of this underneath their banner. Their banner was Mary Magdalene. The first songs that they wrote were songs for Mary Magdalene. In the time of greatest darkness, when fear was everywhere, they turned to her as their beacon of light and their inspiration to enable them to stand in the face of suffering and death and still to sing and dance with joy. I could point over and over again to moments in history where similar things have happened, where amidst terror and violence and persecution and oppression and corruption and greed and disease and disaster, people have turned to her and found the strength and courage to be their best selves. So now is a time, again, where we need to bring Magdalene's light to the world and turn to her as our role model, our heroine, our source of strength. And to realize that we're not isolated people, that we are actually just the people who are right now at the end of that long procession throughout history that is held underneath her cloak of compassion. May it be so. Thank you.